everyone, my name is Holly, and in today's video I'm going to be doing a spoiler-free review for The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. I don't know which one it is. The Poppy War is an adult fantasy series that made it to the finals of the Goodreads Choice Awards this year for very good reason. Much of the story is pulled directly from Chinese culture and history. Specifically, it's centered around the Sino-Japanese War. Now, before we move on to my review, I do want to immediately mention some trigger warnings that this book involves because they are very important. So for anyone who is very sensitive to violent rape, self-harm, substance abuse, detailed writing about murders of men, women, and children, and don't take those trigger warnings lightly because there are even very detailed passages of babies in this war. This is a very dark book. It is not sugar-coated or toned down at all. This book is meant to be horrid. So this book is actually separated into three parts. So the first part, we are immediately introduced to Ren, our main character, who is an orphan, living in this very poor village that no one cares about, and she works in this general store for her adoptive parents, who are also smugglers of opium. She dreams of getting away from this place, and it becomes even worse when she becomes arranged for a marriage to an older man. This is when she decides to take this very famous test that could possibly get her into the most prestigious military academy within this country and set her life on a positive track. No one believes that she can do this, and well, she ends up acing that test. Even though people think that she cheated, she packs up her very few belongings, and then we end up following her very tough day-to-day life in this military school. So getting into the details of the school portion of this book, I definitely want to mention that the author had Harry Potter influences for sure. There is a headmaster who is very whimsical and odd, and he teaches lore, and his classroom is at the very highest point of the school, which is totally Professor Trelawney, who teaches divination at the highest point of Hogwarts. Yes, I'll admit the school portion was definitely riddled with some pretty large info dumps, as Ren is taking lore, history, strategy, combat classes, and learning about the country's past and present, gods and shamans and battle tactics. So is the reader. There is a lot of information to learn, and I'll admit my nerdy side was quite fascinated with all of this information. Well, most of it. It did become a little bit tedious sometimes. Funny thing is, I didn't find this book dark at all at first. I was 50% of the way through this book, and I was like, why is everyone labeling this book as a incredibly dark and brutal fantasy? Then suddenly I was hit in the face by the very blunt transition from part 1 going into part 2, and the book took a big U-turn. And also at this point is when I kind of noticed some uneven plot pacing, because it is kind of like la-di-da-di-da school, and then all of a sudden our characters are in the front lines of a big battle. After settling into the second half, it became a million times better. We finally got those really dark seeds that I was waiting for, and all of that information that we were fed in the first part really took flight within these war-ridden pages, including some major plot twists. In a way, this book reminded me of Attack on Titan. It's intense, it's heart-pounding. I read parts 2 and 3 in half the time I read part 1. Did it get dark? Oh yeah. There are some very gruesome passages, particularly at the very end of the book, where I feel like a lot of authors use bloodshed within their story for the use of shock factor. Every act of violence propelled the characters in the story to its final destination. Nothing was extraneous, and seeing that much of the story is based on actual events, if the author had toned down any of this, I felt like it would have been a disservice to the real massacre it's based off of. The book gets darker and darker in a very slow and steady fashion, and it's really hard hitting at one point to where I had to set the book down and I couldn't read it anymore because it was so brutal and heartbreaking. I literally had to try and pull myself together. And the characters, oh goodness. Their relationships are so very complex and dynamic, and the relationships kept changing. The school portion characters are so different compared to the war portion characters, and we are following two different groups for each time, which I thought was pretty cool. They are all faced with a question of what to do in the face of senseless evil. There is one character that I started out hating their guts, and then by the end of the story, I loved them, which is one heck of an accomplishment in my book. So I struggled with this rating, and I'm currently struggling with this rating. I even sat on it for a few days to see if my mind wandered back to the story, and the end result is that it did. This is a fantastic debut by this author, and as much as it's hard to believe with so much stuff that happened in this first book, the Poppy War easily managed to set up a perfect plot line for the sequel. I did end up giving this 4 stars on Goodreads, but man, there's so many days where I'm like, should I rate it 5 stars? I feel like I should rate it 5 stars. And then I'm like, nah, keep it 4. But I'm like having such a hard time rating this book. So that is it for this review. I really hope you enjoyed. Give this video a big thumbs up if you did. Go ahead and subscribe if you haven't. I upload videos every single week. Follow me on my social media. On Instagram, I'm at Holly Hearts Books, and on Twitter at Holly Niece. And until we meet again, happy reading.